important provisions as far as input tax credit is concerned. One pertaining to the proportionate input tax credit under rules 42, 43. Very complicated formula. Maybe we'll have to learn back our arithmetic, maths, Excel, everything to really implement that entire provision, not to first understand the law, and thereafter even a lot of mathematical skills will be required for that. And the same goes with rule 36.4, and that basically comes out of the tug of war between the government and the trade, and the level of mistrust which exists between.
Please unmute yourself.
Yeah. So yeah, this technology always will create some difficulties, and that's exactly what is the background of Rule 36.4. When GST was introduced, we wanted and ambitiously to look at a very interesting technology of an automatic system where everyone would be compliant with the GST filings, and the credits would automatically flow, and then there would be an accept reject. We are all aware of the GSTR 1, 2A, 2, 1A, and 3. And when it got implemented, all of us are aware that we just could not move anything beyond 1 and 2A. The 2 just did not happen. And that's where government brought in GSTR 3B. Again, the government felt that there are some challenges and people are misusing credits, and there are lots of unmatched credits. So suddenly in the October 2019, we brought in a rule 36.4, wherein we brought an artificial restriction of 20% of unmatched credits. And of course, that 20% then reduced to 10%, and Parth will take us through all of that. But again, this is one more area where you will find that a person is being penalized for no fault of his. How far is it valid, especially in the context that the government itself has not been able to implement its technology and the portal well? I think these are questions which are very open-ended and debated questions. I will not take too much time to start with, as it is we are a little bit behind schedule. I'll straight away request Parth to take up his session, and whatever are the comments, we can reserve those comments towards the end. Over to you, Parth.
Yes. Sir,
I think screen is visible now, no?
Yes. No, it's not visible. But by the time you manage that, I am just ensuring that, sir, because the screen sharing is not possible right now, so I'll just email you the content that I have. So in case the screen sharing is not is little behind or something, you can at least refer whatever I'm trying to say. खाली email विनोद खाली इनको सर को email कर दो ना. Yeah. Good morning, friends. When we come to ITC, like Sunil sir very rightly said, that ITC is like the backbone of any VAT or GST sort of a law. Anywhere where tax is payable on any kind of value addition, be it goods or services, ITC is extremely important. Because without ITC, the whole business and the whole transaction, it will become not feasible. So that is why we have the whole ITC provision. We've had ITC provisions under service tax, we've had ITC provisions under VAT, and now under GST. Now, there is this word that we continuously keep on listening, which is called seamless, that we always presume, we always hope, not presume, we always hope that the credit flow will be seamless. But we've always seen that that has never been the case when it comes to credit flow. There is obviously some conditions which can be put in, which are valid by the government, and some which are not at all justified. But basically, if you look at 41, 42, and 36.4. So basically, how I have I propose to go ahead is that we'll discuss rules 42, 43 first. We'll obviously not be able to discuss the calculation, because that in itself is a very big exercise. But certain issues in relation to 42 and 43, Especially there were in March itself, 43, there were some amendments. Some of them were quite welcome, and some of them still do not clarify certain aspects which are there. Screen on nahi raha hai. Yeah. So then that is where we come to 42 and 43. Now, first coming to 42 and 43, where does this rule 42 and 43 come from? As we all know, rules are there to carry out the purpose of the section. Now, section 17, which deals with apportionment of credit and block credits, that is where 17.1 talks about allowing credit which is utilized for taxable purposes.
Mark, please unmute yourself.
कहाँ से आया मैं? Now am I clear?
Audible now. Now you are audible. Yes.
ये स्क्रीन शेयर नहीं होगा तो कैसे होगा? उसमें एग्जाम्पल है.
पार्थ अभी शेयर कर सकते हो, देखो आप पार्थ.
हाँ, मेरे से शेयर नहीं हो रहा है ना, वही तो है, उसके लिए दिनेश ने किया. Vinod, can you try? I mailed you also.
Okay, I'll try.
Yeah.
Chalo. Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah. No. Okay. So, if you go to section 17.3, section 17.3 personally also says that there will be certain rules, there will be certain manner which will be prescribed. So, in which the credit which has to be taken can either be the manner in which it has to be apportioned, that will be taken up. So now coming to rule 42. Rule 42 basically deals with manner of determination of input tax credit in respect of inputs or input services and reversal thereof. Very important, because this is only dealing with inputs. When you talk about input, you talk about goods, and when you talk about input services, you are talking about input services. We're talking about क्या हुआ? Yeah, you talk about input services. So why this is the case is because section 42 specifically only deals with either traded goods or goods which are manufactured and then sold, and which are either purchased by them, or input services which are available. As regards capital goods, there is a separate section which is section 43. So now with that we come to rule 42. What does it say? And especially when we are dealing with rule 42, we'll have to look at the rules 42 and 43 in two separate tranches per se, because rule 42 and 43 both have two separate kinds of treatment. One is the regular treatment for all other transactions, and the other is the treatment for construction services. More so construction services, because there was an amendment to the construction services, and the tax rates were changed. And those who had opted into for the old system for ongoing projects, for them the calculation is actually a bit more. It's quite complex. Say. Now, before you have, एक मिनट, विनोद हुआ क्या? There is an example. How can I just?
Now we are trying through some other computer. We have sent it to Umang. Umang will try it from his end. We have made him host.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll skip the example for now. Now, what is the way when you are talking about the issues of 42? in relation to even apportioning, calculating. What is the biggest issue that you will face? Not when it comes to construction services. After the amendment, yes, perfect. Can you go down? Further down, further down. Bas. That's it. Now, if we are taking an example of, we are not really taking an example of ongoing project, because ongoing project will have further complications. So just taking a very simple example, when you talk about a commercial project, for example, commercial project, the tax rate is not is unchanged. So if it is a purely commercial project, for that this example will make it much more clearer in the way. So say for example, there is a project which has 30 units to be sold, and for the first example in 2018-19, there are 10 units which are sold, and the consideration received is about 20 crores. The ITC availed is 10 lakhs, and amount payable is say 11 lakhs. So basically you go ahead and pay 11 lakhs. Now in 1920, there is an excess ITC on the basis of example, because the consideration received was 30 crores and the ITC availed was 12 lakhs and what was payable was 10 lakhs. The excess ITC is 2 lakhs. Excess ITC is 2 lakhs. Now, what happens in 2021 is that in mid 2021 is when the this is a hypothetical example. In mid 2021 is when the OC is received. But before the OC is received, there are 5 units which are already sold. Yeah, there are 5 units which are already sold. So 5 units are sold, and 5 units are sold after OC. So in that case, what happens? Now, after the amendment, what happened was that any apportionment that had to be done in relation to Schedule 5B activity, which is construction services, basically, yeah. So in that case, the calculation was not required to be done on a year-on-year basis, but instead it had to be done project-wise. So what it means when you go project-wise is, now this project-wise calculation applies even to ongoing projects. So if you have opted in for the old scheme, you will still have to go project-wise. So the tax period becomes for the duration of the entire project. So in that case, Rule 42I says that. Now the total, in that case, how will you actually calculate the amount of credit which has to be reversed? Because what Rule 42 basically tries to say is that if you have made certain supplies which are not taxable, in simple words, any credit which is attributable to that particular supply has to be reversed. So in this case, what we are trying to determine is that in the above example, the only supply which was made after the tax was applicable was the 5 lakhs which were there. So in this case, what happens is, if you look at the example over here, the total tax credit, the entire project duration, the total tax credit is about 32 lakhs for the entire project. Total taxable sale is 65 crores, and the total exempt sale post OC is coming to 20 crores. So here, if we look at if we have to look at the amount of credit which has to be reversed, which is attributable to the exempt supplies, you follow the regular proportionate method, wherein you take the entire credit and then you multiply it by a ratio of the proportionate ratio of the exempt sale upon the entire total turnover of sale. So that is where it will come to around 7.5 lakhs, which will have to be reversed. Now, how will you reverse it? Umang, can you go further down? Go further down. Next page. Up. अप अप अप, अरे रे रे, बहुत आगे चले गया. नेक्स्ट पेज.
ओके.
Yeah, next. This is 2. Go to.
ऊपर जाना है,
Go.
नीचे जाना है?
हाँ, ऊपर ऊपर. पेज 2 पे जाओ. हाँ 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 हाँ, बस बस. अभी थोड़ा ऊपर, थोड़ा
Okay.
थोड़ा
Okay.
नीचे. Further, little down. बस. जाओ ऊपर जाओ, थोड़ा जाओ. Go little down. That's it. That's it. I apologize for this technical glitch because I am not able to share the screen. That also this is going to be an issue. Now, what this basically means is, now if you look at the rules 42 and if you look at rule 42 for construction services, after say rule for, I think. 42(2) onwards is when they are providing you a treatment for say ongoing projects which have opted in for the old scheme. Now, in such a scenario also, the calculation will always be project wise, but in this case, the only thing is that there will be a further bifurcation on the basis of carpet area of area which was taken up, which area which was the total carpet area, and also the total carpet area which is of flats, which flats or units which remain unsold at the time of receiving of OC. So that is the further bifurcation which will be there. But even here, there will only be. You will always have to apportion the credit on a project-wise basis. Now, that takes us to one particular aspect of 42. But with regards to 42 and apportionment of any kind of credit which is non-taxable and reversal of non-taxable credit, there are several other issues also which actually come up. Now, one of the issues that that comes to my mind is that, take for example, say in circular 92 of 2019, they had given some examples. So, say for example, free samples. Now, the question here is whether these are supplies. If they are supply, would it be taxable supply, exempt supply, or any other supply? Now, to our fortune, the circular has itself stated that the items which are supplied without consideration between unrelated parties are not considered to be a supply, and the question of reversal will not come. But further on, before the friends, you would know that there was an explanation which was inserted to section 17. Before the explanation that was inserted to section 17, rule 42 had to be applied in several transactions for which we did not know what was the actual status. Take for example bond transfers, for example high seas sale. There was a lot of debate whether these have to be taken up as non-taxable sales, whether they cannot be exempt sales, or whether these are non-taxable sales, or whether these are supplies, whether you have to incorporate it in your 3B or not. Now, the good thing is that after the explanation, it becomes very clear that certain supplies which are now incorporated in the Schedule 3, transactions like bond transfer and high seas sales, they are neither exempt or taxable. They are not supplies at all. So that is why there is no need to proportionally reduce the ITC. Now, friends, the point is that except for construction services, all other ITC has to be reversed on a yearly basis only, on a financial year basis. Now, if you look at in Rule 42.1e, the 42.1d, there is also a reversal of there is also a reversal in relation to credit which is attributable to which is not available under Section 17.5. Section 17.5 are block credits. Now, one of the major issues which I see, especially with regards to these COVID issues or current disruption, and which might have direct impact on Rule 42, is such that, for example, there is now what does 17.5 basically say? 17.5 says that goods lost, stolen, destroyed, written off, or disposed of by way of gift or free samples. Now, what does 17.5? For example, there are certain goods which were stalled at any of the state boundaries because of the restrictions or because of the lockdown, and say, for example, they are perishable goods and they are not at all they are not claimed, they cannot be, they are not marketable, and the recipient refuses to take it. Now, what happens to such a turnover? Even if the person refuses, I mean, so in such a case, will this be any kind of will such a transaction fall under, say, goods which are lost or stolen? Or, for example, they could also be stolen because the truck is there and the driver has run away or whatever, especially because of disruptions which are being seen right now. So in that case, will 17.5H be applicable? And as per Rule 42, will you have to actually reduce the ITC which is there? Now, in such a scenario, in my opinion, now if you, even before going to Rule 42, it is important that you always go to the section which is over here. If you have to reduce any ITC, any credit which is attributable to 17.5, you actually have to see what the 17.5H actually say. Now, in my opinion, that any of those goods which are lost, stolen, or disposed of, destroyed, if they are written off or disposed of either as a gift or a free sample, only in such cases will you actually have to apply Rule 42 and reduce the appropriate amount of ITC on such cases. Now, why is this? Is because goods which are actually stolen or lost in the due course of business, in my opinion, even if they are destroyed, they being perishable or whatever, they cannot be said to be have either written off or been disposed of by way of either gift or free sample. So in this case, ITC to that extent will not have to be reduced. Now, if there are any other issues with related to 42, we can also take up later on. So now we'll go to the Rule 43. Yes. So friends, Rule 43 prescribes the manner of determination of and apportionment of input tax credit in respect of capital goods. Capital goods have been given a separate treatment under the GST law. So that is why capital goods which are used exclusively for non-business purposes and for effecting exempt supplies are not eligible for ITC. It's very clear. Capital goods which are used exclusively for business purposes and business purpose and taxable supplies are fully eligible for ITC. Now, when the issue actually arises is that what happens in scenarios? What happens in scenarios when capital goods are used commonly for taxable as well as non-taxable or exempt supplies? So in that case, in such a mixed kind of scenario where the capital goods are used for both kinds of supply, is where you will have to actually start attributing. You'll have to see how do you actually attribute the supplies. How do you calculate ITC which is attributable to taxable supply? how do you calculate ITC which is attributable to exempt or non-taxable supply. Now, Rule 43C was recently amended by notification 16 of 2020. Now, there are certain changes over here which make it quite, I mean, they've tried to actually clarify the rule, but if you look at it, they have actually washed their hands off on several aspects over here. Now, I'll just read the amended rule 40. I'll just read the rule, the amended rule 42 for 43C. What it says is the amount of input tax credit in respect of capital goods not covered under clauses A and B, not covered under clauses A and B, denoted as A, being the amount of tax as reflected on the invoice, shall credit directly to the electronic credit ledger, and the validity of the useful life of such goods shall extend up to 5 years from the date of invoice for such services, provided that where the capital goods earlier covered under clause A is subsequently covered under this clause, the input tax credit in respect of such capital goods shall be credited to the electronic credit ledger to the condition that the ineligible credit attributable to the period during which such capital goods are covered by clause A, denoted as T ineligible, shall be calculated at the rate of 5 percentage point for every quarter or part thereof, and added to the output tax liability of the tax period in which the credit is claimed. Go further, I don't need to read this. Yeah. Now, friends, there are two aspects which I have actually highlighted over here. Otherwise, there is no issue over here. They are simply prescribing a mechanism wherein they said that which are not covered by the simple rules 43A and taxable and non-taxable supply. In that case, you go to 43C, and 43C, and then there is a mechanism which is prescribed. Now, what volume low hai kya? Now, in this case, in the amended section,
Parth, there is some connectivity issue, internet का problem है कुछ तेरे end पे.
मेरा तो चल रहा है इंटरनेट अभी तो.
आवाज रुक के आ रहा है तेरा. Okay, you go on.
So just to interrupt, but your voice is fine. So a few people said your voice was coming low, but I think now that's died down.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So moving on. Now, when you come to Rule 43, 43C, the main issue over here is that why have they started using terminology which was actually not fathomable till now, starting with reflected on the invoice. Now, earlier when the GST law started, the whole point was that whether it is shown in the returns, whether it is shown in the returns as per 39, at that point of time, section 39 meant that there is going to be a GSTR 3. Then as we go to Rule 36.4, you will see that they have started talking about uploaded. Now, after uploaded, they have come to the simplest terminology, which says that reflected on the invoice. Now, what it basically means is reflected on the invoice, friends. It means is that they are saying that if it is reflected on your GSTR 2A, only then will you be able to claim such a credit. So here it doesn't matter. They have actually started to wash their hands off. And as time goes by, I see that this kind of terminology in relation to reflection of invoice will be seen in most cases, in several cases, because now the terminology of returns is going, filing of returns as per 39 is getting redundant. After that, they tried the upload of invoices. That is getting redundant. Now the terminology which we will slowly start seeing is as reflected on the invoices. Now the other issue here is that moving on. Now the other issue in this 43C is that up till now, if there was any reversal which was required, if you fell into 43C, you could have reversed in your 3B by reversing the ITC. Now what happens? Now over here, what they have done is that they have clearly said that now they have added the terminology saying that the reversal will have to be done in a particular manner. And once the reversal is done in a particular manner, you will have to add that to your output tax liability. Now, when you talk about adding to the output tax liability, it means that even if you have interest, even if you have ITC at that point of time, you do not need to, there is no need to, you cannot reverse the ITC, but you'll actually have to add it to your output tax liability. Now, the question will obviously arise is that one is that it's an additional tax burden, which is there. Now, if the additional tax burden, presuming that the additional tax burden is there and moving on further from that, now what happens to the interest in such cases? Because you don't know how many quarters. I mean, if you fall under 43C after say 4 quarters or 8 quarters, so in that case you'll have to reduce ITC to that particular aspect. So in that case, you'll have to first the output tax liability. One is your taxable liability on a month-on-month basis, and then there is a further output tax liability instead of reversing. So now the question will be one, whether this output tax liability, if whenever you reverse, will you have to actually also calculate interest on such a output tax liability? Now, why this question comes in? Because it is obviously, unless it is specified otherwise, whenever something becomes an output tax liability, it becomes payable from the point in which the first time of supply was triggered. At that point of time, it becomes payable. So the logical corollary or apprehension would be that would interest also need to be whenever there is a reversal which is required, and whenever there is a particular amount which you need to, instead of reversal in your ITC, you add it to your output tax liability, will you have to actually also calculate interest? Now, in my opinion, this is an ambiguity which is currently there. But if you look at Rule 50 and if you look at other judgments also which are there in the explanation which is added, which they have not yet notified, here, as long as you have appropriate amount of interest, there is no question of you leaving any kind of appropriate amount of ITC. There is no question of you leaving any kind of calculating any kind of interest on such output tax liability which is added. But if there is no ITC which is there and you're still adding to the output tax liability, in that case the question will be whether you'll have to calculate interest. Now, in this case, it might right now it is an ambiguous view, and although it seems that that is not the intention, that even while adding to the output tax liability that you calculate interest, but the moment the terms like output tax liability comes, the apprehension always remains that some assessing authority or someone might take a view that interest is also leviable. So that requires further clarification in this case. Now, Rule 43D and 43E are also amended just to clarify and correct the errors, wherein they have initially they had not inserted words like in respect of capital goods. They had just said input tax credit attributable to the common credit. So there was always a confusion. So now they've added words like in respect of common capital goods whose useful life remains during the tax. So as regards Rule 43D and E, it's a sort of a welcome suggestion wherein they have just made the calculation a bit more easier. But at that being said, that being said, let us look at, there is also a erroneous formula which was actually pointed out to me yesterday by my friend Umang Talati. Wherein they थोड़ा ऊपर जाइए. Let's go forward. बस अरे पीछे बहुत आगे
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now let us take this example. For example, prior to the amendment, say the asset was purchased in April 18 for 1 lakh rupees, and the tax was rupees 18,000, and this was used exclusively for taxable purposes. So this was used exclusively for taxable purposes. So that is why there was no your credit was available. It was also taken in the same period. In April 18, the goods are going to be used for now common purposes, that is for taxable as well as exempt supplies. So based on the formula, what will happen is that you to calculate the amount of ITC which has to be added to the output tax liability, it will be your 18,000 minus the ratio of 18,000 into 5 percentage points of every quarter. So say there is 4 quarters, so it becomes 4 quarters. So it will be 14,400. So this now, if you have to actually then attribute it to, because the useful life of a capital goods is 60 months. So it's mandatory to be 60 months. So the amount of 14,000 will have to be then divided by 60 months to arrive at the amount of input tax credit attributable to the tax period on the common capital goods during the lifetime. So here, that is why this issue which was there, because they had not given up because Rule 43D was erroneous and they were not really talking about attributable to capital goods. So they have now clarified this, and so to speak, it is clear to that particular extent. But regardless of that, there are certain scenarios in the certain scenarios which are still not covered under the Rule 43. Now those scenarios are, for example, capital goods which are used for common purposes and are subsequently used exclusively for taxable purposes. Capital goods which are used for common purposes are subsequently used exclusively for effecting exempt supplies. Now, the third example is what I feel is one of the most probable example. One is capital goods which are being used exclusively for effecting taxable supplies are subsequently used exclusively for effecting exempt supplies. Now, this is the scenarios in 2 and 3 are most probable, because say there are certain capital goods. क्या निकाल दिया? What happened?
You want me to take over? No, I think he shared again.
Yeah. Now scenarios in 2 and 3. Now say there are capital goods which are earlier producing both exempted as well as taxable supplies, and they were very much following the Rule 43. Now what happens when they are now, if you look at say under the COVID, now say capital goods which were used for supplying PPE kits or sanitizers are exempted by the council, or some of the products are exempted by the council in the future during the COVID pandemic. So in this case, 43 per se is not clear as to how you will actually deal with such a scenario and how will you actually calculate the amount. Now, capital goods which are used exclusively for effecting exempt supplies are subsequently used exclusively for effecting taxable supplies. This also can happen. There's certain GST council after a meeting decides that certain goods which are exempt are now become taxable. So in that case, how will you actually treat the transaction? That will also have to be, that is also another challenge which remains. अभी आगे जाओ विनोद. I'm sorry, this screen sharing is creating a bit of an issue. So, bus.
Parth, can you please try your screen sharing? Now I think it will happen since you have been made co-host.
Wait.
Vinod, तुझं बंद केलंस तर चालेल का?
हाँ चालेल. I don't mind. If it is okay.
Parth, 2 मिनट लगेगा.
दिनेश नहीं हो रहा है वो प्रॉब्लम वो है.
नहीं हो रहा. It's okay.
Okay.
You carry on.
मैं वही I'm very sorry but वो नहीं हो रहा है. वो मैंने 2 बार ट्राई किया पहले भी बट वो नहीं हो रहा है.
No problem.
Now, similarly, for when you come to Rule 43, when you come to there is obviously rules for continuous supply for ongoing projects which are opted in. There is also a proportionate formula which is given, which you have to, if you have actually opted in for the old scheme, in that case you may have to apply that formula which is there. Now, of course, we are not really looking at the formula at this point of time. Now we come to the other aspect. The other aspect being what the other major rule which is going to cause a lot of heartburn, or which was initially causing a lot of heartburn, and after the COVID pandemic, it is going to create after things open up, after the lockdown, it will create much more issues. Now, that is issues in relation to Rule 36.4. Now, what does 36.4 basically mean? 36.4, what does 36.4 say? The input tax credit which is availed by a registered taxable person in respect of invoices or debit notes, details of which have not been uploaded by the supplier. So that is why I'm saying you look at the chronology. This is the second type of chronology. Initially, it was always about whether the returns are filed. Then it moved to uploaded by the suppliers. And then later, and as we see the recent amendments to 43C and 43D, wherein they have said that reflected on the invoice. Reflected on the invoices are reflected on GSTR 2A. Now, details of which have not been uploaded by the supplier under subsection 37.1, which is GSTR 1, shall not exceed 10% of the eligible credit available in respect of invoices or debit notes, the details of which have been uploaded by the supplier under section 37.1. In its simplest form, what does 36.4, as Sunil sir rightly stated, what does 36.4 state? The GST Council said that in the first meeting when 36.4 was introduced in November, there was no talk about fake invoices, or there are certain measures which are being taken against the fake invoices. But later on, when there was a further reduction to 10% after 1 month, they said that there is a menace of fake invoices, and to fight that menace of fake invoices, Rule 36.4 is being introduced. Now, as regards fake invoices and Rule 36.4, how are they at all connected? I really don't know. What does 36.4 say is that while claiming ITC in your GSTR 3B, the amount of ITC you can claim is not as per your books. You first look at the ITC which is available on your 2A, and even if there is a mismatch between, if the ITC which is reflected in your books is far higher than what is reflected in your 2A, the amount of ITC you can avail for that particular month or that particular tax period, month only, that particular tax period will be only 10% of the total ITC which was reflected in your 2A. So do hell with your books for that point of time. Later on, if they again reflect, in that case, yes, you can again go back and claim that ITC which is there. So Subsequently, in March, around the lockdown period, because they understood that there's going to be a return filing is going to be a lot of issue over here, and then there will not be a clarity with regards to how much is the credit that one person can take. So they added this proviso. What does this proviso say? Provided that the said condition shall apply cumulatively for the period February, March, April, May, June, July, August 20, and in the return in form GSTR 3B for the tax period of September 20 shall be furnished with the cumulative adjustment of the input tax credit for the said period in accordance with the condition above. So basically, when it comes to 36.4 for February onwards right up to August, 36.4 you do not have to apply the 10% formula. But when it comes to September, you will have to give a cumulative effect to the above. We are going to discuss specific issues that will arise out of this proviso. But before that, let us just take a very simple example of how Rule 36.4 would actually operate and how Rule 36.4 will operate and what are the issues that will arise out of that. Now, I have taken this example and I've taken the percentage as 10% for the ease of understanding. Now, say for this, in December 2020, the ITC as per books is 50. The ITC reflecting on your 2A is ITC as per books is 100, and the ITC reflecting on 2A is 50. The total ITC allowable in GSTR 3B will be 50 plus 10% of what is there, because that is only the ITC which is allowable 50 plus further 10%. So it will become 55. Balance ITC which will remain unavailed for the month of December will be 45. Now you go to January 20. Total ITC as per books is 200. The total ITC which is reflected in your 2A for the month of January only is 100. Now additional ITC from January is wrong, so it should be actually taken as December. So the total ITC which is now reflecting from December 2020 now on the 2A is 30. So when you are filing your January return 3B, this is how ITC will actually have to be calculated. First is the eligible ITC of January, which is 100 plus 10% of 100. Then the ITC of December, which is now reflecting in your 2A. Whatever is reflecting in your 2A, that is 30, which is fully allowable. Now, because it is reflecting in your 2A, you can again apply 36.4. So then the total ITC of Jan, which can now be added on, will become 30 plus 10%, which is 33. So the total ITC for the month of January in the January 3B will be 143. Now, so in that case, the balance ITC unavailed as per 3B is 90, and the balance ITC of December, which is still unavailed, will become 12. Now what happens is February comes. Now say for example, you have not filed your returns for February. Now February returns were, most of the people had actually filed the return. But for February, you carry forward to February, and this is the period which is from where the proviso starts being applicable. ऊपर जाओ ना. बस. Now, what does the proviso say? The proviso is simply saying that February onwards, if you look at our calculation, so there was a certain ITC which was still not remaining, which is not yet availed, carry forward from the month of December and January. Now for February, because you are covered by the proviso says that you can continue taking the entire ITC, but the actual cumulative effect will have to be taken in the while filing the September return. Now, the question that obviously arises is that will all the previous credit which is unavailed in the previous month become available again? So even credit which is not attributable to February, credit which is there from January, December, or even early, 36.4 had to be initially applied on in February as well. So will that ITC which is unavailed also be able, would you be able to take that ITC and then in September give it a cumulative effect? Now in my opinion, the proviso will actually start becoming effective only from February onwards. So when you start availing your ITC for the month of February is when the proviso will actually be applicable. For the earlier periods, the 36.4 might, it is possible to argue that the 36.4 as earlier will actually remain. Now it should not be that way, because that will create a dichotomy wherein you'll have to have a separate calculation till January for 36.4, and then February till about August there is a cumulative calculation and which will be shown in February. And this is also much more problematic, is because GSTR 1 of February 20 is not extended, because that was already done before the lockdown. Only GSTR 3B is extended subject to certain conditions of late fee and reduced rate of interest. You can file up to either 26th June or either 29th June. Now, what is the issue that one foresees for when such a proviso is added? Now, does the proviso actually suspend or defer the operation of 36.4 till September 20? In my opinion, no. What the proviso is not actually suspending or deferring the operation of 36.4 at all. What it is saying is that 36.4 will still remain applicable. But to give that effect, we are allowing you to give that effect in the month of September. And you give a cumulative effect to that. So that is why, and this is a major reconciliation issue, which if you ask me, because one will have to look at GSTR 2A for each and every month from February onwards up to August. And then because GSTR 2A is a dynamic document, you'll have to keep on Vinod, can you go further up? Thank you. बस 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 थोड़ा नीचे.
Okay.
Yes. Now there is another issue which I see here is that say for example, what it says is that if you want to give a effect to 36.4 for the month of February till about August, you can give it cumulatively in September because of the proviso. But for February and March months, as per 16.4, the time limit is anyway the time limit for availing, not return filing date. The time limit for availing any ITC is September 20. Now, will that mean because of this proviso, even in September, if there is certain ITC which is not yet reflecting in my 2A, can I still provisionally take at 10%? 10% of what is not still viewable in my in my 2A. Now, this, of course, I mean, in my opinion, no rule can supersede a section. So when you look at it is all good to say that you can give a cumulative effect in September from February to August, but February to August is not a particular time period. They actually split 2 financial years. So February and March will be one financial year and then will be another financial year. So from the reconciliation point of view, it will be a major headache, which is there. Now, the other problem is that the recipient will actually need to keep on having a month-on-month record of how the ITC is reflecting, because what happens is that if the ITC does not eventually get reflected and you have to reverse it, then what is the interest that will have to be calculated, or whether I'm not getting into the issue whether interest has to be calculated or not, but what is the interest? But if the invoice never reflects, in that case there is no question, interest will be applicable whether on net basis or gross basis. So on a month-on-month basis, the recipient will have to keep on looking at the 2A and check what is the 2A status, and you will actually, to make a cumulative statement in September, you will have to make a month-on-month calculation of GSTR, month-on-month calculation of 36.4 as well, because otherwise how will you come to the cumulative portion in September 20? Of course, any other mechanism or method which is there, but it can be taken up by the chairman. But also the other issue is that whether interest is to be calculated at the time of cumulative adjustment on the month-on-month basis. Now, you adjust your ITC or you reduce your ITC depending on whatever is the scenario in September. Now, suppose there is a certain ITC which is in excess, which you've already taken, and giving the adjustment in September, you actually have to reverse it. So in this case, whether interest will be payable or will you have to offer interest in this? In my opinion, because the rule itself allows a cumulative adjustment, it is possible to argue that interest cannot be levied on such a transaction, because I was by law or by a rule allowed to adjust it only in the month of September. Now, of course, this is open for interpretation. So this is just my opinion, and any further clarification on this is very welcome. विनोद थोड़ा और ऊपर जाओ, अभी आगे जाओ. बस थोड़ा नीचे. Yeah. Now that was the issues which are there in relation to the cumulative to the proviso which is inserted to 36.4. Now we come to what are the general issues in relation to 36.4, because let us presume that even after September 36.4 is going to be there, and since the returns are now the new returns will be further delayed, 36.4 will be applicable from the month of November 19 onwards up to January, and then from February till August, cumulative adjustment in September, and then once again the regular operation of 36.4 will be applicable. Now, the most important, the most glaring issue that comes out of 36.4 is less of a calculation issue, but is more of a business issue, that is of the that एक minute. Oh, comments are. I'll take up an illustration later. Yeah. I'll take up an illustration later. Yeah. Now take for example, this is a huge working capital issue, especially since GSTR1 is now filed on a quarterly basis and monthly basis. So for all the recipients whose suppliers are filing on a quarterly basis, they'll have to take a huge hit on a quarterly basis. They'll have to have a huge hit on a quarterly basis for at least 2 months. Your working capital will be blocked. Now, if you look at the circular 123, what it says is that if you look at, it says that any calculation in relation to 36.4 will have to be done on a self-assessment basis, because right now the system is not able to help you. So basically they are saying that the system will be of no assistance to you, but you still have to do a self-assessment in this case. Vinod, thoda aage jao. What are the issues that arise out of this? Now, the obvious issue that arises out of this is that obviously how do you calculate it? Because your GSTR 2A is not a stable document. GSTR 2A is a very dynamic document. GSTR 2A is not real time. If a person files, there are several cases where a person files GSTR 1 on the last date, it does not reflect in my 2A on that particular date. So my date as per 36.4, whatever reflects in my GSTR 2A at the time of filing the returns, it may not reflect. It may not reflect on the same day. It might reflect after 2 days. It might reflect after 3 days. So in that case, whether I have to let go of that ITC, whether I still avail that ITC with the presumption that because that GSTR 1, the invoice details are already uploaded. So in that case, I should get the ITC. Now, what does they say is that amount of IT. Now, what does point number 3 is very important in this case to understand this. When they are talking about the dynamic document and whether in such cases where invoice is actually uploaded but not reflecting in your 2A, what do you do in such cases? It says the amount of input tax credit in respect of invoices, debit notes whose details have not been uploaded by the supplier shall not exceed 20%, or earlier it was 20%, now it is 10% of the eligible input tax credit available to the recipient in respect of invoices or debit notes, the details of which have been uploaded by the suppliers in the GSTR 1 as on the due date of filing the returns. So what is required is that it should not be reflected, but rather, as long as you know that your supplier has actually uploaded the details, in that case, you can avail that particular ITC. You can presume while calculating the ITC as per 36.4, you can jolly well avail the full ITC on such a scenario because it is uploaded. For invoices which you do not know if they are uploaded or not, technically speaking, you cannot actually avail the ITC, and you'll have to wait for the next month. So for that particular month, that ITC will not be available. अभी नीचे जाओ, आगे जाओ. Yeah, बस. Now, what are the other issues with this rule is, now friends, that is why the title of this workshop is aptly named Intricate Issues in Rule 42 and 43, and as well as not section Rule 43. क्या लिखा है इस Rule 36.4. Now, that is why we don't say that solutions to issue. It is just issues that you are raising. Now the point is that these are things which will have to be alert to. But whether there is a particular solution to such a scenario, no. There is going to be some heartburn. Yes, there is going to be some heartburn. The heartburn is one from the consultants or the return filers or the accountant's point of view. It is the heartburn of calculation. It is the heartburn of extremely complex calculation which has to be done on a month-on-month basis. And the other one would be for the dealers who have to maintain records separately, and at the same time they have to actually they are actually incentivized to file their GSTR 1 on the very last date. File the returns, any returns on the very last date, because if it is till the last date, you want to wait as to whatever what are the amounts which are reflected in your 2A, so that you can take the entire ITC. Now take for example, take for example a particular person. Take for example, there is a particular person who is used to filing the returns much on time, say on the 5th or earlier, much earlier than normal. But his suppliers may actually not file the return GSTR 1 on time, and it will not reflect on his GSTR 2A at the time of him filing the return. So that is why he will also be required to wait till the very last date. Otherwise, he will not be able to take a lot of credit which is not yet reflecting in his GSTR 2A. Now the other issue is that though there are very few DRC 03 notices that came to my notice, but there are a lot of courtesy letters which had already started earlier, before this pre-lockdown era. Now what was this courtesy letters? Now what it says is that the officer comes out with his own particular set of calculation, saying that as per 36.4, this was an additional ITA which was there. So that is a calculation which is there, and calculation which has no bearing to your calculation at all. Now why is that? That is also because it's a very simple thing. GSTR 2A is dynamic. When the officer actually collects the details of 2A might be very different. And also, what are the details which are reflected in his 2A? And what is the sanctity of the 2A details that he takes? And what is the sanctity of the GSTR 2A details that we avail? Is not really determinable. We don't know. So that is why it is very important, whenever you get such a notice, the officer, it is important to actually demand that the details of 2A, on the basis of which he has actually come to the working, and the data be viewed and inspected by the SSC themselves. Because otherwise, there is, if you look at any DRC 03, or if you have ever received any of these courtesy letters in relation to 36.4, you will not find any kind of similarity between what is viewable, what is your record, what is your data, and what is the data as per the officer. So that is why principles of natural justice always ask for the working which has been relied on by the officer. And if you actually eventually are fortunate enough and you get the working, so in that case you can go ahead and challenge the same if at all you find there is any issues in such a case. Now, when you talk about Rule 36.4, it's fairly simple. Rule 36.4 reduces your ITC. Now, what is the actual issue with such a rule? The actual issue with such a rule is very simple, is that a rule cannot go ahead and do something which is not even there in the section. This is always the case. A rule is always meant for carrying out, it's a delegated legislation, it is meant for carrying out the purposes of the section. If the purposes of the section, now if you look at the section, look at section 41. Now how does reversal of credit under the GST or the CGST Act or the GST law, how is it envisaged? It is envisaged that first, as per 37, 38, 39, you will file your returns. Now 37.1 is your GSTR 1. Now 38, GSTR 2, we have to completely forget about it. Now coming to 39 initially envisaged GSTR 3. Then there was an amendment in 65, Rule 61.5, wherein it said that instead of GSTR 3, you can also file GSTR 3B and it will be fine. But that being said, that is all for availing. What about mismatch or cancellation or reversal of ITC? How does that happen? Section 41 deals with the claim of ITC and provisional acceptance thereof. So Section 41 very well lays down certain guidelines in which the ITC can be provisionally accepted and how can it be claimed eventually. Now, even if there is a particular mismatch, or if there is a particular reversal that has to be done, that comes from Section 42, which talks about mismatch and reversal of ITC. So, when 41 and 42 are clearly laying down guidelines, and they are guidelines which are not there as per 36.4. Now, anything close to 36.4, if we want to see, we'll have to actually go and see the yet to be notified section, which is 43A. 43A is where they actually are in the section. They are saying that you will initially, when the new returns are eventually applicable, is when you'll be able to initially take provisionally take credit only of about up to 20%. Even there, they have clarified that you will be able to provisionally take credit for if there are two particular tax periods for paying return, which is quarterly and monthly. You will have to you will be provisionally be able to take credit from quarterly dealers. Now, over and above that comes Section 16. How does my ITC become eligible? And the point is that once ITC becomes eligible for me, can ITC be taken away by me from a rule? थोड़ा ऊपर ले लो, मास्क के आगे ले लो. बस. Yeah. What happens in those cases? Just one second. So obviously the next issue that will come up is that whether such a rule is right for a challenge to the courts. Now, of course, I mean, there are not any interim judgments on this case, but as I'm aware, I mean, I have filed one of the cases. There are several other courts also where they have actually challenged 36.4 earlier. Now the impact after September, because of this cumulative impact, will be different. That challenge will be different. That challenge will be different. Now, if at all you have to challenge the constitutionality of Rule 36.4, what are the grounds that you will actually have? The grounds that actually come, that actually present themselves, also come out from, one is the section itself, which entitles me to ITC in certain conditions. Then, what is the injury it is causing to certain sections of businesses? And the other thing is that how impossible is it to actually comply with such a restriction which is there. So one of the first challenges would be whether it infringes, that 36.4 infringes on the fundamental rights of the petitioner to carry on trade and commerce as per 19(1)(g), and it creates an impossible to comply and unfair burden of paying taxes on account of purchases of inward supplies. If you have actually purchased from your inward supplies from quarterly dealers, you are unnecessarily made a scapegoat thanks to this rule. Now, the other aspect is that after there was till about the case of McDowell, wherein they said that even if the law is arbitrary, it doesn't mean that it has to be struck down. But thankfully, in the Saira Bano case, which was the triple talaq case in 2017, 9 SCC 1, wherein they have again brought back the concept that if a particular act or a particular law is manifestly arbitrary and unreasonable, it can still be struck down as violative of say, Article 14 of the Constitution. Article 14 of the Constitution is the equality before law, and hence it can be struck down as ultra virus. The other challenge to 36(4) can be what I already said is that Section 16 has 4 conditions. There has to be an invoice, there has to be a receipt of goods, then there has to be a payment of tax, and the returns have to be filed. Now, as the returns, as per Rule 16 is Rule 16, what they are envisaging now is 3B. Now, returns also, if you have to actually claim the, if you have to actually, yeah, if you have to actually claim the input tax credit, rule Section 16 mandates that you actually have to file the return. It doesn't even talk about the supplier at all. It just talks about the recipient. Now, with regards to payment of tax and receipt of goods, receipt of goods is obvious. That is presumed that you have actually received the goods or there is a constructed delivery. And payment of tax. Now, friends, remember that though GSTR 1 is filed on a quarterly basis for some dealers, you still have to pay your taxes under 3B on a month-on-month basis. So the payment of tax is also made by your suppliers. So in that case, whether a rule which is running contrary to the provisions of the section, whether that can be challenged as being arbitrary. Now the fourth ground is a bit more optimistic because though there is one case of Arise India wherein they said that wherein they had said that such a section where ITC is disallowed, even if it is because what the GST Council says, the intention of this section is very simple, that they want to avoid this fake invoices menace and this over invoicing menace. So they said that you cannot treat your honest and innocent taxpayers and guilty taxpayers at the same class, whereas they constitute 2 different classes, and they are not similarly situated. So that is why, if they are not similarly situated, you cannot have the same law for them. If you want to have a particular law, they have to be. If you want to bring about any kind of a benefit, or you want to burden anyone, so they have to be to a class of people who are similarly situated, and they are not separate classes. In that case, you will not be able to take the. In that case, the challenge will not hold. Now, when it comes to manifest arbitrariness, now if you look at in Saira Bano, they had said in judgment where they said one of the excerpts that I will actually read out, that which says that constitutional infirmity is found in Article 14 itself whenever a legislation is manifestly arbitrary, that is, it is not fair, not reasonable, discriminatory, not transparent, capricious, biased with favoritism or nepotism, and not in pursuit of promotion of healthy competition and equitable treatment. Now, of course, friends, if you look at 36(4), I mean, where is the question of healthy competition? Here, if you are a recipient, if you are a big time manufacturer, and you have set up an industry in, say, a particular Mofussil area where you have a lot of small suppliers who are supposed to file returns on a GSTR 1 on a quarterly basis, you will continuously be on your back foot, because for the 2 months of the initial 2 months of the quarter, you will not be able to avail the credit which is there. So that is why it's a good challenge to say that it is manifestly arbitrary, and it is not in pursuit of healthy competition. Now, when it comes to 19(1)(g), also 19(1)(g) from both sides, one recipient will stop purchasing from people who have to file quarterly purchases, who have to file GSTR 1 on a quarterly basis, despite them paying all the taxes as per GSTR 3B on a monthly basis. Despite that, now, and also for a recipient who is being put at a disadvantage for purchasing from quarterly dealer. So the suppliers also have a challenge and the recipients also have a challenge on albeit slightly different aspects, but the logic remains the same. So with this, so what happens is that rules 36.4, or for that matter, if you look at 42, if you look at 43, that ITC, what we see is that the ITC is never seamless. And whenever there is a question of whether a particular ITC is attributable to, be it your taxable or non-taxable supply, or be it for proportionate reduction in case of capital goods, or for that matter, downright reduction of ITC as per Rule 36.4. As per Rule 36.4, there is the intention is never been to actually make the process simple. Now, for this, there are a couple of things. One is that when we look at our when we deal with our clients, and they come and tell us that what happens is that the law is particularly law in the calculation is very complex, or say for example Rule 36.4 is unfair upon them. Now in that case we can only empathize with them. There is nothing else that we can do, because till it is not struck down by the courts, all the rules, all the sections, they are absolutely constitutionally valid, and you have to follow them. You have to follow them. So with that, I leave on not a very happy note, saying that issues in relation to ITC are there and they will always remain. I apologize for the technical glitches which were there, and that is why there was some issue with the flow also of the talk which was there. With this, I conclude my talk, and I request Mr. Sunil Gabawala, my chairman, to take up whatever issues which are there and correct me and reprimand me wherever I was wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Parth. I think it was a wonderful exposition of various issues in input tax credit. And necessarily input tax credit is such a topic that every time you look at it, you'll find a new dimension to that entire process. And definitely there are perspectives, and there may be different perspectives to the same thing and different methods to do the same thing. There's no question of any reprimand or anything like that. Of course, wonderful job done by you. I think what has been covered is 3 or 4 major issues, and I'll just comment my thoughts on those 3-4 major issues, and I'll go in reverse order so that the participants' memory is also fresh. So let me start with the Rule 36.4. Now, when we look at Rule 36.4, I think Umang has shared this illustration on the screen, which people are able to see. I tried to send it on the chat, but I think many have not been able to open it. I tried to make a very quick math of how it might look like. And I think the first 4 columns are important, the headings of those columns. In your books, you will keep on booking the input tax credit as and when you receive the invoice. And there's some number over there. The vendors will keep on uploading that in taxes into their GSTR1, which will come in your 2A, which has been reflected in the column number 2, second column 2A, which was there on the screen. I think, Umang, if you can just keep that screen for a minute, I think things will become much clearer to participants. The third is the credit which you ultimately claim in 3B. Now, necessarily what you are required to do is Rule 36.4 forces you that when you claim or avail the credit for the first time, it's not a question of claiming credit and reversing it and things like that. At the time when you are first asserting your claim of input tax credit in your 3B, at that point of time, you are told that your unmatched credit cannot be more than 10%. So therefore, in January, because his 2A was showing 100 and we are right now not assuming ineligible credits and things like that, he would be eligible to put in his 3B only a figure of 110. And the balance amount of credit, though it is there in his books, would be treated as an unavailed credit as far as the GSTR 3B return is concerned. Now, in this background, in February, as has been rightly pointed out, we have opened up the floor and said that we will now apply this test cumulatively from February to August 20. Now, what is the implication of this cumulative thing which we have to do in September? My understanding of that entire proposition is to say that you have opened up the gate and therefore from February to August, if you have already filed the return for February, no problems. You anyways you would have done something. But if you have not filed the returns for February, in that scenario, it really opens up your entire gate of claiming the credits. And essentially what would therefore happen is you would be in a way eligible to claim the credits which are unavailed in the earlier months as well. So technically this 90 rupees which was there in the earlier month, you could have availed. I think that's a small error in this sheet because it was done a bit faster. Maybe Umang, you can just change this 150 to 240. And I'll explain that. Yeah, thank you. So what happens is in the month of February, in your books, you have a 150 rupees credit. In your 2A, there's a reflection of 100. From February, this rule gets relaxed. Moment this rule gets relaxed, whatever was unavailed for any of the earlier months automatically becomes eligible, and there is nothing stopping you from claiming that amounts in your 3B. And therefore, you have claimed a total of 240 in 3B. Thereafter, from March to August, you will keep on claiming the credit as appearing in your books. You have to ignore what is coming in your 2A. Now, when it comes to September, what you will do is you will at that point of time take a cumulative count of your 2A and books, and then you might end up in a figure which will result in the balancing figure, which will be shown in your 3B. And therefore, if you go to that September, I have tried to put in a small formula there. If Umang, you can just go to September and highlight it or do a F2, you will be able to see the formula. What it basically tries to do is it tries to cumulatively take the total of your 2As. It takes the totals of your credits which have been claimed in 3B, and then it says your 3B cannot be more than 110% of 2A. And therefore, if there's any excess, you will have to reverse. If there is any deficit, you will not claim that. So that is how I think this entire provision will apply. And when you apply it in this manner, at the end of September, you will reinstate certain unavailed credit. But for the periods from February to August, there will not be any unavailed credit as far as 36(4) is concerned. This is how I would primarily look at this provision. Necessarily in this scenario, there's no question of interest coming up because there has been a relaxation. If you are claiming the credit which was legally due to you, and therefore if in September you are making the amends either by way of reversing credits or paying it out of from cash. For example, in this example, you see that he ends up paying something out of cash because he has already availed credits which were never reflected in his 2A, and therefore and his 2A figures are reasonably low. Therefore, you are ending up, you can just enter it Umang so that you can see the negative figure over here. So therefore, in 3B, he is ending up with a negative figure of -28. But had there been a little bit more in his 2A, maybe around 80, instead of in June, instead of 80, if you change it to 110 or something like that, you will see that then there is no question of any payment. It's only that he will claim that much less credit in September 20. This is how I think one will have to overall look at this provision and deal with that rather than going into month-on-month reconciliations, which according to me in these months is not required. So 2 points which I was highlighting. One is the fact that the unavailed credits up to January can all be encashed from February to August, whichever month you want to. And the second is that the interest will not be applicable so long as all the amends are done in the month of September. I think these are a couple of inputs on the 36(4) which I would want to share. Coming to capital goods, yes, Rule 43 is itself a very complex rule in the way it has been drafted, but some of the scenarios have been covered. For example, if the capital goods were taxable and therefore full credit was claimed and later on they become exempted, in that case there is a section 18(4) which deals with this scenario, and there's a specific rule, Rule 44. So it of course works in a similar manner, assuming useful life of 5 years. So one will have to go into those provisions, and there will be a reversal required if initially the products are taxable and when you bought the capital goods and you claim full credit, and thereafter the goods become exempted or something like that. You have section 18(4) to deal with it. So that's not a big challenge. Similarly, if capital goods were exempted at the time they were procured and you didn't claim any credit, later on the product becomes taxable. In that case, the proviso to Rule 43 subclause C will take care of that scenario. And therefore, under that scenario, you will be eligible to a proportionate credit to the extent of the unutilized useful life of the asset. Again, useful life will be assumed to be 5 years. And again, using that complex mechanism, you might be eligible to claim the credits. One question which was being asked was whether interest will apply in case of reversals on account of Rule 43 capital goods. I think there is a 43 subclause H which clearly talks about interest, and therefore the applicable interest will have to be paid in view of the specific provision which has been mentioned in that regard.
Sir, would you want me to share the rules? I have it. I can share the screen if you want.
No, I think I'm just putting. I don't think we would be having too much time.
Okay.
So I'm just referring to these rules, and the participants can go back and look at those rules, because I think we have time up to 1:30. So I would just like to touch upon some areas where I thought would be important for the participants to understand the rules. Maybe the participants can go back to those rules and look at them themselves.
Sure. Okay.
The next aspect which I think was being discussed was about the free samples, and an interesting point which was being made was relating to the phrase which was there. Umang, if that phrase can be shown, I think it would be useful. Section 17.5, wherein we have that phrase. I think it was there even in
I will.
notes.
I will. 1 second.
I think a couple of things which we might need to bear in mind on that provision.
So what I would do is directly open the act itself.
Sure.
I think you want to the shared goods sold off, disposed of one, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. 1 second.
So if you read these provisions, it says credit will not be available in respect of goods lost, stolen, destroyed, written off, or disposed of by way of gift or free samples. Now, essentially what it restricts is the subject matter of input tax credit. And as we are all aware, input tax credit is available on inputs. And therefore, this clause will apply only in case where inputs are lost, stolen, destroyed, written off, or disposed of by way of gift or free samples. It is not when your output is being lost, stolen, etc. Now, that is the first important distinction which we need to bear in mind. So typically, when you look at a pharma company, they might be buying various chemicals and they would be supplying free samples not of those chemicals, but they would manufacture those chemicals and convert them into pharmaceutical products or drugs. And those medicines would then be given as free samples. So the way the law is drafted, that medicines, the person never claimed the input tax credit. The input tax credit was claimed on chemicals, and those chemicals have not been lost, stolen, destroyed, written off, or disposed of by way of gift or free samples. It is therefore only in case of inputs where you will face a difficulty, and not in case of outputs, especially in the context of manufacturers. So I think that was one important input which we need to bear in mind on this part. And that takes me to the last aspect about the mess which the government has itself created relating to the real estate sector, and the amendments which were proposed in with effect from 1st of April 2019. Again, I would like Umang to go a little bit above where we have section 17.2. And I will restrict myself to the discussion of Rule 42 and 17.2, which was highlighted by Parth in his discussion. Now, if you look at section 17.2, because ultimately whenever we look at a rule, the rule will have to find a genesis from the legal provisions of the act. And a rule cannot exceed something which is given as a brief by the act. And these are, I think, settled principles under the legislative parlance. So let us read what section 17.2 talks about. What 17.2 says is, where the goods or services or both are used by the registered person partly for effecting taxable supplies and partly for effecting exempted supplies under the said act, the amount of credit shall be restricted to so much of the input tax as is attributable to the said taxable supplies, including zero rated supplies. Now then there is a subsection 3 which says the value of exempt supply under subsection 2 shall be such as may be prescribed, and that is where you have this Rule 42 coming into place. Friends, make no mistake, there is a distinction between 17.2 and 17.3. 17.2 talks about the obligation of restricting your input tax credit to the credit which is attributable to taxable supplies. Whereas 17.3 applies a principle of apportionment or the method of apportionment by defining a value. Now again, 17.3 will come into place only when 17.2 is applicable, because it itself starts by saying the value of exempt supply under subsection 2. In that sense, 17.3 is secondary to 17.2. Now let's look at a real estate scenario. The heading says where the goods or services are used both for providing partly effecting taxable supplies and partly for effecting exempted supplies under the said act. Now when you use the word and over here, you need to bear in mind that you are talking about a simultaneous scenario. So if I am a trader trading in taxable goods as well as exempted goods like agricultural goods, at the same point of time I am dealing in both the activities. Whereas when you look at a real estate builder, we are saying prior to the occupation certificate it is taxable, post occupation certificate it is exempted. Most of the builders have a single project and an SPV for a single project. In those types of scenarios, there is no simultaneous activity of taxable supplies as well as exempted supplies. And if that is not there, assuming you are an SPV having only one project in that SPV, then 17.2 itself is not attracted. If 17.2 is not attracted, 17.3 and Rule 42 will not apply at all. That is one view, which may be a bit aggressive, but that is also a possible view which one can take looking at the way the section 17.2 is drafted. The second aspect which comes here is, now assuming that we don't want to take that position, or assuming that you have multiple projects and therefore at the same point of time you might have taxable as well as exempted supplies, and therefore you progress from 17.2 and move to section 17.3. Let's read what 17.3 says. It says the value of exempt supply under subsection 2 shall be as may be prescribed. Make no mistake, section 17.3 permits a prescription only for a value. It does not permit a prescription on a method other than a value. Whereas for commercial projects, we are told that you have to apply an area-based prescription. That therefore is not under the provisions of section 17.3. They've tried to do a little bit of an tinkering around by a removal of difficulty order, ROD 4 of 2019, wherein they've tried to bring out this aspect and somewhere try to talk about it. Umang, can we have that ROD 4? If you can go to the CBIC, you will be able to find it. Just go to that home page of CBIC, which you are there on the next tab, you know. Yeah, and in this you can just go to orders and removal of difficulty orders, CGST. Yeah, that's wonderful, Omar. If you can go to 2019 and open up number 4, ROD number 4. Yeah. Now, so therefore they tried to understand this issue and therefore they have tried to do this. Let's see what they have done. They have said for the removal of difficulties, it is hereby clarified. Now, removal of difficulties. I don't see there was any difficulty at all, first of all. Now, yet we are saying for the removal of difficulties, it is hereby clarified that in case of supply of services covered under this clause, which is basically a real estate, the amount of credit attributable to taxable supplies, including zero-rated supplies, etc., shall be determined on the basis of the area of construction of the complex building, civil structure, etc., which is taxable, and the area which is exempted. Now, these are very loose words. In very loose words, we also as business people might say that 100 square feet is taxable, 50 square feet is exempted. But when it comes to the technical interpretation of the law, you can exempt or make taxable only a supply. You cannot make or taxable or exempted a particular area because your subject matter of taxation is a supply. And in this entire ROD, they have consciously avoided the use of the word supply. In the absence of the word supply, this entire ROD itself may not survive. More importantly, whether this is really a removal of difficulty at all or not could be a question mark. Let's understand it from CGST Act Section 172, which empowers the government to give the ROD powers, ROD provisions. Can we go to Section 172 in the Act, please? If you just go to the Act, which was open in another tab, and just move to 172.
One second, I'm just
A
heading
little
to
bit,
it.
yeah. Yeah, that's it. So the ROD order which we just read comes from this. If any difficulty arises in giving effect to any of the provisions of this act, there was never any difficulty. In fact, there is a tribunal decision which says that real estate developers are not required to reverse credits at all under the service tax regime. The government may, on recommendations of the council, by a general or a special order, make such provisions not inconsistent with the provisions of this act. The moment you say that you are prescribing an area base instead of value base, it is inconsistent with the provisions of the act. And therefore, it is likely that this ROD rule will not have any implication at all. And in looking at it from that perspective, maybe the entire Rule 42 may be unviable, and you might be able to claim the full credit without any reversal whatsoever. Of course, if you want to reverse, the entire complications and all have been explained by Parth, so I don't want to go into that. I just thought I'll present one more perspective to this entire issue, which we can look at. I think these are some of my thoughts on the issues which were raised, and it was really a wonderful listening to Parth and essentially, the expertise over the three generations was evidently visible in the way he was presenting his discussions. And special thanks to Umang also for volunteering and showing us the relevant provisions. It helped me in concisely trying to cover up the issue.
My pleasure, sir. My pleasure.
Yeah, over back.
Sharing.
Dinesh, can I just say thank you, Sunil
Yeah.
sir. Thanks a lot, Sunil sir. I don't know what the earlier generation, that legacy is a bit of a problem, because there's a lot of there's a very big barrier which is created. So I don't mean about that, but I actually have to apologize, because there are certain places where the flow was not very correct, because I was having difficulty with the screen over here. So I apologize for that. And thank you for being patient initially. And thank you for your expert inputs.